Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
I'd really appreciate your comment. It helps me understand if you enjoyed the story and how I can improve in future ones. The promotion email landed at 9:41 a.m., 2 lines of text that changed the way people looked at me in the elevator. I'm Nathan Kessler, 40, newly appointed Director of Operations at Argus Pay, a wire rails fintech with more servers than employees. My first morning as a director smelled like hot plastic from new badge laminates and burnt coffee from the executive floor galley. My name was stenciled on frosted glass, the desk still too clean, the chair adjusted for someone taller. I sat there longer than I meant to, calm, a little stunned, letting the new title settle on me like a jacket I wasn't sure was mine yet. Mara didn't congratulate me in the way people expect a spouse to. She worked here before me, rose faster, and carved out her lane in finance with the kind of confidence that bends conversations around her. "Careful with the adrenaline," she said, breezing through my doorway with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Big money moves upstairs. Ops just keeps the lights on." She set a paper cup on my desk without asking how I took it. I thanked her anyway. That's our pattern. She issues the lines, I absorb them. The day keeps moving. By noon, the director's chat was already pinging about backlog in settlements and a patch rolling through the card-issuing API. It was the exact kind of mess I understood. Numbers that didn't reconcile because a flag was tripping in one environment and sleeping in another. My job now wasn't just fixing it. It was owning the outcome when someone else's system fell over. I like that clarity. Responsibility makes sense to me. Blame does not. What didn't make sense started small. 2 meetings later, I bumped into Dax, the company's legal counsel, in the hall outside finance. He was leaning on Mara's doorframe, that lazy posture of people who think rules are for other people. He nodded at me like a neighbor at a mailbox. "Heard the news," he said. "Congrats." His eyes flicked toward Mara and back, like there was a private joke I hadn't earned. I moved on. I'm not built for hallway politics. That night, I found a manila folder on our kitchen island. Mara had arranged the pages neatly, clipped by category. The first page wore my name, pre-filled in bold. "Director onboarding is always paperwork heavy," she said, scraping her hair into a knot. "Just sign where the flags are. It's routine." I scanned without reading, the way people do when they know they'll come back to something. A few lines flashed at me. Client instruments, operational acceptance, indemnity. The language drifted out of ops and into finance, which is where Mara lives. It felt off. Not a smoking gun, just a nudge in my gut that the page was standing in the wrong room. "Why is legal copied on onboarding?" I asked casually. "Because they are," she said, already annoyed that I'd noticed anything. She tapped a sticky note on the front. Dax's card was paper-clipped beneath it, the corner worn like it had spent too much time in a pocket. Handwritten on the note, "Thanks for quick turnaround." And she watched my face as I read that line, waiting to see if I'd swallow it whole. "First week as a director," she said, softening her tone. "You don't want to be the guy who delays basic internal approvals. Trust me." I nodded because nodding is a way to buy yourself time without handing over control. "I'll review these in the morning," I said. I kept my voice even and uninteresting. In my head, I was arranging shelves, not arguments. Where do these pages actually belong? What systems would they touch? Why was I being asked to bless something I hadn't been looped into while it was being built? Mara laughed the way people laugh in meetings when they're reminding you who runs the meeting. "Nathan, this isn't a thesis defense. You sign, they file, money moves. Ops doesn't need to understand how it moves." There it was again, the little blade she keeps for me. "You don't understand. You're the mechanic under the car. I'm the one reading the map." I rinsed my glass, set it on the rack, and didn't respond. Silence has weight if you let it sit. In bed, she scrolled in the blue glow of her phone, her body turned away. I listened to the radiator tick, the dog sigh, the city wash outside. I don't chase people into fights anymore. What I do is notice. That's the job, on and off the clock. I noticed that the packet had more to do with vendor wallets than systems uptime. I noticed that the signature blocks were formatted for wet ink, not the company's secure portal we use for anything that actually matters. I noticed that the email trail was thin, like it had been scrubbed of the usual FYI, looping ops noise. None of those things were proof. All of them were tells. The next morning, she slid the folder back in front of me while I buttered toast. "Sign before you forget," she said, as if my memory were the problem. I opened to the first colored flag and read more carefully. The phrasing was precise in the wrong places and vague everywhere else. It assigned operational acceptance of transactions associated with clients I'd never seen in production logs. If those clients were real, they were invisible in the traffic. If they were fake, someone had done the paperwork well. I felt my jaw set. Who drafted this? I asked, keeping my eyes on the page. Legal aligned with finance, she said. Standard. Which clients? I asked. Don't overcomplicate it, she said. She took a long drink of coffee and smiled into the cup. New title doesn't make you a rainmaker, Nathan. You're ops. Be helpful. I closed the folder gently and wiped my fingers on a napkin so she wouldn't accuse me of stalling with a mess. I'll sign what I understand, I said calm. I won't sign what I don't. She set her cup down harder than she meant to. Porcelain on granite, a tiny crack of thunder between us. You'll do what you're told, she said, not loud but sharp. You're not the strategic one here. I let the words find a place to sit in me without letting them spread. The way you watch a flame inside a glass and decide not to add air. I picked up my jacket, kissed the dog's head, and said I'd be late. In the car, I sat with the engine off for a minute and watched the neighborhood kids walk to school in hoodies and neon sneakers. I thought about systems and how they break, rarely in one dramatic snap, mostly in small tolerances ignored for too long. Somewhere between sign here and don't ask, a load-bearing beam had been moved. At work, the day came at me the way first weeks always do, half real issues, half theater. I brought pastries to my team because titles don't matter to cron jobs, and the guy who remembers people's donut preferences gets better incident reports. Mid-morning, Dax dropped by my office and leaned on the door like he'd practiced it. We good on those forms? He asked, eyes acting casual, mouth a little too eager. I'm reading, I said. They're routine, he said. Then there's no rush, I said. He smiled like I was cute. Directors don't let paperwork bottleneck. I didn't look away. Directors don't sign blind. He was the one who looked away first. Loop me when you're done, he said, already retreating, voice light. It was the lightness that stuck with me, like whistling at a funeral. That evening, our apartment felt staged. The folder centered on the table, pens aligned like cutlery, a note in her confident script. Don't overthink. The dog nosed my knee as if to ask which room I belonged to. I cooked. We ate in near silence, the kind that lets you hear your fork every time it meets the plate. Mara texted through most of it, thumbs quick, face blank. When she finally looked up, it was to say, "You're making this difficult." "I'm making it precise," I said. She rolled her eyes, "The universal sign for you're beneath me." "Precision is finance," she said. "Ops turns screws. Ops keeps the screws from stripping," I said, mostly to the air. She laughed once, ugly and short. "God, you sound like a manual." After dishes, I took the folder to my desk and read every page. Not to win a fight, to understand what fight I was being walked into. My name was everywhere it didn't belong. The timelines were suspiciously tight. The approvals were stacked in a way that made oversight sound like ownership. I put the folder back exactly where she'd left it. I didn't remove a thing. Before bed, she leaned in the doorway and watched me brush my teeth like I was a stranger in her bathroom. "You'll sign in the morning," she said, not asking. "I'll review in the morning," I said, rinsing. She shook her head and smiled that cold, professional smile she saves for people who don't know they've already lost. "He'll do whatever he's told," she said to herself, turning off the light as she left. I stood in the dark for a long breath, listening to the faucet drip once more. Then I dried my hands, turned the light back on, and set my alarm 15 minutes earlier. Not to sign, to watch. To be exactly the kind of man who keeps the lights on when someone else tries to switch them off. The folder didn't move overnight. It sat in the middle of our table like a nameplate, waiting to tell me who I was. By 8, Mara had her blazer on and her tone set. "We're not dragging this," she said, passing behind my chair and tapping the stack with a nail. "Director means decisive." At the office, decisiveness turned out to mean I inherited 2 vendor outages and a reconciliation tale from last quarter that no one wanted to own. While I triaged, Dax appeared in my doorway with a smile that looked ironed on. He didn't ask if it was a good time. "Quick touch," he said, coming in anyway. "Those onboarding consents. Legal prefers wet signatures." The e-portal is fine for HR fluff, but these tie into client instruments. Faster on paper. Faster for whom? I asked. For everyone, he said, as if speed were an argument that ended all other arguments. We've got a board ratification Monday. Finance wants the file buttoned up today. Board ratifies my onboarding paperwork. Board ratifies a lot of things, he said lightly, like a man who keeps doors open with his foot. Help us help you, Nathan. He left before I could ask which clients were being helped. The cadence was familiar. Create a false deadline, attach it to prestige, and rely on the new guy's fear of being the delay. I was curious, which is noisier in the head but cleaner in the hands. Mara texted the same minute Dax cleared the frame. Sign them before lunch. Dax is trying to keep us on track. Us. I looked at the word for a second too long. Then I set my phone face down, solved the vendor outage, sent 2 measured emails no one would read, and blocked the afternoon on my calendar. At home that night, she'd staged the set again, flag tabs, pinned like a prop. She poured wine for herself and water for me, and sat across the documents with a smile that might have sold condos. New roles have a rhythm, she said. You don't want to start off looking resistant. Resistant to what? I asked. Process, she said, and took a sip. I open-paged the packet. The language had sharpened since the version I'd peeked at. The clauses wore their edges cleaner, the signature blocks multiplied. 3 signatures for me now, not 1. These weren't like this yesterday. Formatting, she said, not looking. Legal loves their fonts. And the clients? I asked. Tiered vendor structure, she said. Your team doesn't see the whole path. That's why we compartmentalize. She glanced up then, gauging whether I'd swallow compartmentalize, as if it were a synonym for trust. I closed the folder, slid it back to the exact rectangle of what it had claimed. I'm not signing tonight. Her jaw barely moved, but the room changed temperature. You're making this difficult for no reason. I'm making it correct, I said. She laughed, short and tired of me. Ops and their manuals, she said. You think you can torque your way out of everything. We slept like we were sharing a hotel room. 2 strangers with different flights. In the morning I submitted PTO, cleared my board, and texted my mother. By noon I had a ticket to New Mexico and a story about helping with a leaky skylight. It wasn't a lie. My parents always had a project in motion. I left a note on the counter. Out of town a few days. Need quiet to get my head around this new scope. Mara called before I reached the airport. What are you doing? Taking space, I said. I don't sign when I'm rushed. You're not being rushed. You're being on board. Then onboard me when I return. A pause. Then the cool voice she saves for junior analysts. You don't want to look like a problem on day 3. Then don't make me one, I said, and ended the call before we drifted into the fight she was fishing for. On the flight, I wrote down an unremarkable list. Boarding pass number, gate, departure time, a reminder to keep receipts. Because the habit of proof beats the habit of drama. My parents met me at arrivals with hand-painted signs they reused for nieces and nephews. My mother asked if a director still eats. My father insisted on carrying my bag, even though my bag had wheels. Their kitchen smells like cumin and dish soap. The table has 3 scratches from a project I ruined in high school. I placed the folder there, took a photo of nothing in particular, and left it closed until morning. Mara's text stacked while I ate enchiladas and listened to my mother tell a story I'd heard so many times it had become a song. Have you signed yet? Came at 9. We need this buttoned up. Came at 10. Dax says Monday is firm at 10:06. I didn't reply. The night found its shape around people who love me for reasons that don't require notarization. I woke early, made coffee the way my father taught me, and opened the folder. No new surprises, just the same grafted responsibility wearing a tie. I signed what they'd staged without comment, dated neatly, and slid the pages into the return envelope they'd provided. The pen felt heavier than it should. I sealed the flap, pressed it with the flat of my palm, addressed it to Dax's attention because that's whose card had claimed ownership, and wrote certified in the corner the way our postmaster always preferred. At the post office on Guadalupe, I asked for tracking and a round date stamp. The clerk thumped it with a little too much pleasure. I kept the receipt, took a photo of the counter's brass number plaque because I like boring details, and walked out into a sky so blue it felt like a lie. I stopped by a pharmacy for a travel-sized can of WD-40 my father didn't need, paid cash, and pocketed the stub. Small proofs, stacked where a story might go later if someone asked for one. Mara called while I was backing out of the lot. I put her on speaker. Signed, I said. She exhaled. Relief, triumph, both. Finally. You should have just. I signed, I repeated. You'll have it soon. You could have brought it to the office. I'm not at the office, I said, and turned onto the road where the speed limit is a rumor. For the next 2 days, I fixed the skylight, changed a brittle hose on my parents' washing machine, and learned that the neighbor's dog was named Tulip. I kept my phone face down. When I did look, the tone had changed from urgency to victory. Got it, from Mara. Appreciated, from Dax. Back in Austin, the folder was gone. The kitchen island looked relieved. Mara kissed my cheek like people do when they're being watched, and said, see? Not hard. At work, nothing exploded. Finance hummed. Legal hummed. People congratulated me on a rollout I'd had nothing to do with. The calm was performative, sheet music over a sinkhole, but I let it play. I spent that week doing what my job asks, noticing. I noticed the clients, named in the documents, never bubbled up as real traffic. I noticed Dax stopped lingering and started waving from a distance, the way you wave at a neighbor you're sleeping with in a small town. I noticed Mara's jokes about ops got sharper while her compliments to my face got sweeter, which is the knife work of someone who wants the audience believing one thing while the target believes another. At night, I stacked small, dull facts where feelings usually go. Boarding passes. Gas receipts from Cerrillos Road. The postmark. A photo of my mother's calendar with Nate home circled in blue. I didn't rehearse any speeches. I slept. Because I'd drawn a clean line a man can stand on later without wobbling. On Friday, Dax sent a one-line email. All squared away. Thanks. No attachments. I printed it anyway and dropped the paper into my desk drawer behind a box of paper clips. When I closed the drawer, I realized my hands were steady. The trap was where they'd set it. Only now it looked, to anyone who cared to measure, exactly like theirs. The week after Dax's one-liner, the building felt air-conditioned to the bone. Everyone was polite in that way people are when they've decided what the story is and they like their part in it. I kept my head where it always lives, inside the work. Tickets, stand-ups, the hum of racks down in our chilled basement. I acted like a director who shows up, because that's the version of me that leaves the clearest trail. I started with questions that belong to ops, not accusations that belong to gossip. In our service desk, I opened a task with a boring title, Traffic Visibility for New Client Segments. Inside, I listed the identifiers that had shown up in the paperwork and asked for 30-day production traces. No eyebrow raising. Just please attach time-stamped evidence of first live transaction, auth/settle ratios, and gateway routing. Our data engineer, Priya, responded in her neat bullet points. Sandbox pings, test tokens, nothing ever promoted. She included graphs because that's how she thinks. I thanked her the way I always do. Then I exported the thread to PDF and filed it behind a label I made the same day, Foundations. In parallel, I sent a ritual email to Finance Ops. For my orientation file, please attach the client onboarding checklist and go-live sign-offs for the following IDs. 3 minutes later came the reply from a shared mailbox that never sleeps. Those materials are not necessary for ops. Thanks. I replied with my standard line, understood. Please confirm where they're stored so I can cite the location if asked. Silence. I printed that silence, too. It looks like a blank page with a date in the corner and my own patience looking back. Mara was sweeter at home, which is her tell. She saved her sharper jokes for when we were with others. Nathan's getting used to real money, she'd say, touching my sleeve, letting the room laugh. I smiled when the room expected it and excused myself to refill someone's glass. The folder that had lived on our kitchen island was gone now, replaced by fresh flowers and a coaster under her wine. It was domestic theater, set dressing after a scene has moved off stage. I laid my ring in the nightstand one evening and never put it back on. She didn't mention it, which told me the audience she cared about wasn't me. At work, I scheduled a change advisory board review for a release that would theoretically touch client instruments. The agenda was dry by design. Confirm approval path. Confirm ownership boundaries. Confirm rollback. The invite list included legal and finance because I wanted a calendar artifact full of names and timestamps. Dax declined with conflicts and no delegate. Finance sent a junior who took notes like a court reporter and promised to circle back. I recorded action items and closed the meeting at 22 minutes. Then I exported the notes to the same folder as everything else and kept moving. I ordered my proofs the way my father organizes his garage, labels on labels. Boarding pass screenshots. The round date postal stamp from Guadalupe. The certified tracking page printed with a header that shows my IP because someday someone might care. Gas receipts, a photo of my mother's calendar, even the pharmacy stub for the WD-40 that squeaked a hinge that didn't matter. I wasn't building a weapon. I was building weather records, barometric pressure before a storm. If you keep them, no one can call the rain a surprise. Mara kept testing the edges. She forwarded me a reminder from Dax about best practices for director approvals. It was written like a blog post, cheerful, confident, and signed. I replied in the thread and asked our HR generalist for the latest orientation packet for my records because my last packet still had my old title on it. HR sent the link without commentary. I downloaded the bundle and filed it under policies without reading it that night. The point was to know where the rules live when you need the rules, not feelings. In Ops Chat, I asked Priya to add a panel to our Grafana board with first seen dates per client. She did it before lunch because she's good. The new clients didn't register. I stood in front of the board longer than necessary, hands in pockets, letting the absence draw its chalk outline. 2 floors up, finance clapped for a successful onboarding. Down here, the graph argued with the applause. Graphs don't care about applause. The CFO stopped by my office on a Thursday with a smile that has bought a lot of dinners. Heard the board ratification went smoothly, he said, leaning on the doorframe the way men in nice suits do when they want you to know they know things. Good job stepping in without fuss. I appreciate the confidence, I said. For the sake of completeness, could you point me to the approval chain finance used? I want my team aligned with their taxonomy. He waved pleasantly. That's between finance and legal. I nodded like that made sense. When he left, I wrote down the exact sentence he'd used, the time on the digital clock, and the fact that his cuff button was chipped. Because detail keeps you honest about your own memory later. Mara came home late more often, carrying the electricity of rooms I wasn't in. She brought me a bottle of bourbon one Friday, my brand, which means either love or reconnaissance. For the new director, she said, clinking her glass against mine. See? I can be supportive. I thanked her and changed the subject to the dog's vet appointment. The less you feed a performance, the shorter it runs. I kept doing my job. We pulled a gnarly Saturday migration back from the brink because a junior engineer caught a parameter typo and had the courage to say it out loud. I wrote his name into the incident review twice. I asked legal to join our quarterly tabletop for a theoretical fraud event and copied an audit. Dax responded with a one-line decline that didn't even include a period. Audit accepted and sent 2 people who asked real questions and wrote real notes. Afterward, one of them lingered and said, "If you ever need a second set of eyes on something, unofficially, we like practicing." I smiled and said I didn't need anything right now. Then I wrote down her offer verbatim and filed it under neighbors. On Sunday, I walked the dog past a row of townhomes and made a mental inventory of every front porch light that was on at noon. People forget how much they reveal by accident. In my world, accidents are just data wearing sweatshirts. Back at my desk, I labeled one more folder mailroom and dropped in the USPS delivery confirmation. The envelope had been signed for by someone in legal's department whose name I didn't recognize. I added that name to a sticky note on the edge of my monitor and went back to the runbook I'd promised to overhaul before end of quarter. The next all hands carried normal jokes about coffee and backups. I gave my update without spin, incident load, uptime, the usual graphs. Priya presented her new panel. I watched the room when the blank line for those new clients sat there like an unlit bulb. No one blinked. The human eye is excellent at not seeing what violates the story it prefers. I let them keep their story. Mine lived in folders with names that would look boring to anyone who'd never had to prove a thing. Late that night, Mara stood in the doorway of my office at home with her arms crossed the way she'd crossed them in conference rooms. "You're different," she said, as if she were making an observation about the weather. "Since the promotion, since all of this." "I'm quieter," I said. "You're stubborn." "I'm careful." She tilted her head. "Careful is boring." "Boring keeps planes in the air," I said, and closed the laptop. I didn't change my gait or my tone in the days that followed. I sent thank yous when people did their jobs. I left credit where it landed. I kept collecting the unglamorous prints of reality. Who sent what, where it was signed for, which dashboard still refused to acknowledge those smiling client IDs. I didn't spring anything. I let gravity test the scaffolding other people had thrown up in a hurry. Gravity is patient. So am I. Fraud never kicks the door in. It peels paint until the whole frame shows daylight. First came audits questions about clients that made no footprints. Then a freeze on a handful of flows, pending clarification. By the time subpoenas landed, the language turned official and slow. I was named often enough to require a suit and a folder. That's how men like me end up in court. The morning of the hearing, the hallway smelled like copy paper and old varnish. I took a seat near the back with my folder on my lap and my hands open, the way you sit when you've got nothing to hide. Mara arrived with Dax 2 minutes before the clerk called us in. She looked through me, chin high, that boardroom poise she wears like armor. Dax leaned close to her and said something he wanted me to see, not hear. Performances always need an audience. Inside, would everywhere. The judge took the bench with the weariness of someone who's seen every trick twice. Counsel made their appearances. Opposing counsel laid out the simple story first, the story designed to travel well. A director signed operational acceptance for instruments tied to bad clients. Therefore, the director owns the risk. He lifted up the packet with my signature like it was a flag. Mara sat straight. Dax's mouth held a win he'd already spent. When it was our turn, my attorney didn't pound anything. She just asked if I could walk through a few exhibits. I said yes. We started small, the way operations does, timestamps. I confirmed travel dates, the boarding pass, the hotel invoice with my name on it, the gas receipt on Cyrillos, the pharmacy stub I didn't need to keep and kept anyway. I identified the certified mail receipt and the USPS tracking page that shows where the packet began its journey and when legal signed for it. The clerk marked each page. The judge watched without blinking. Dax objected to storytelling. The judge waved that away. He's authenticating. We moved on. My attorney introduced internal artifacts, the change advisory agenda noting ownership boundaries, the invite that copied legal and finance, the decline from legal without a delegate, the audit acceptance, the summary notes with action items. No color commentary, just dates with names attached. We added the ops ticket where I asked for production traces on the very clients at issue and pre-used graphs showing nothing alive outside sandbox. The line for those clients sat flat, like a heart monitor on a mannequin. I held the urge to explain. Graphs don't need me to speak for them. Dax stood to reframe, voice warm. Directors sign for the enterprise, not for themselves. He signed. That's the end of it. My attorney didn't look at him. She asked me to open a different exhibit, my employment agreement and the current orientation packet HR sent the week after my promotion, the one I'd downloaded and filed among the boring things. She asked me to read a paragraph out loud. I did, steady, the way you read safety instructions before a flight. Physical signatures on company financial instruments must be executed on official premises or through the approved e-signature system. Any signature executed elsewhere is invalid and carries no legal weight. The room didn't gasp. It shifted like someone adjusted the thermostat. Dax objected again, taken out of context. The judge asked for the surrounding section. We provided it. The clause didn't get smaller. The judge leaned forward. Where were you when you signed, Mr. Kessler? In Santa Fe, New Mexico, I said. At my parents' dining table. How do you know that? She asked. Tickets, receipts, the postal stamp, and the certified mail I sent from the Guadalupe branch the same morning. She nodded once, made a note, then looked up. Who provided these documents to you outside official premises? There's a moment right before you answer a hard question when your body tries to make a deal with you. Soften it. Soften yourself. I've learned to let that pass. My wife, Mara Kessler, Finance Division, and Mr. Coleridge, Company Counsel. No drama, just names. Mara's eyes broke right for the first time that day. Dax smiled, then didn't. Opposing counsel tried to pivot to intent, to the spirit of onboarding. The judge wasn't interested in spirit. Counselor, if the enterprise requires on-premises execution, distributing instruments for off-premises signature is a compliance failure at best. She looked at Dax. At worst, it's an inducement to violate policy by the very people charged with safeguarding it. He started to speak in paragraphs. She held up a hand. We'll get there. My attorney moved to one last piece. The email from Dax after my return. All squared away. Thanks. No attachments, no CC. She asked me, is this the acknowledgement you received after legal signed for your packet? I said yes. The judge asked who in legal signed the delivery. We had the name. It matched the mailroom log. Small knots tied neatly. Opposing counsel tried the higher ground. This is a technicality. The substance is that he agreed. The judge tapped her pen 3 times, a small metronome that set the room to her tempo. Courts are full of technicalities. We call them rules. She turned to me. Mr. Kessler, did you ever meet these clients in the ordinary course of your duties? No. Did you ever see live traffic associated with their identifiers? No. Did you ask for production traces? Yes. And what did you receive? Evidence that nothing moved. She sat back. So the only movement we can prove at this hour is a set of documents traveling by certified mail from an out-of-state branch to a corporate legal department, contrary to written policy, accompanied by an email from counsel declaring the matter squared away. She looked at Dax. Do you understand why that sequence concerns the court? He said he did not share the court's concern. The judge wrote something longer this time. Then we'll memorialize it for you. My attorney asked for 2 immediate orders. First, that any purported acceptance tied to my signature be deemed void under the policy. Second, that communications between finance and legal regarding off-premises execution be produced, including drafts and message metadata. She didn't ask for sanctions. The judge granted both without leaving the bench. She added her own, an instruction that outside counsel review potential conflicts, and a directive that internal audit extend scope to document who initiated the distribution of instruments to non-authorized locations. Then she looked back at me. Mr. Kessler, one more time for the record. Who handed you the packet? My wife and company counsel, I said. The words landed like a stamp on an envelope. Nothing explosive, just official. We broke for 10 minutes. In the hallway, no one spoke to me. Mara stood against a column, arms wrapped tight, staring at a painting of a river that didn't look like any river I've ever seen. Dax turned his phone over and over in his hand without unlocking it. I poured water from a cooler and missed the cup by a little. Even steady hands sometimes shake after you stop needing them to be steady. When we reconvened, the judge made one more note about timing. She wanted logs from the company's e-signature platform to prove a negative, that no valid portal execution existed for the instruments in question. She wanted building access logs to confirm I wasn't on site the day the documents were executed. She wanted the policy attestation forms both Mara and Dax had signed during annual compliance. Audit will call that boring. Judges call it foundation. We adjourned just before lunch. No verdicts or headlines, just a record that now belonged to more people than me. Outside the courthouse, the light felt harsh in that way noon can be when you haven't eaten and the air smells faintly like hot breaks. Mara walked past without breaking stride. Dax checked his reflection in the glass, found nothing to adjust, and kept moving. I called my mother instead and told her I'd stop by soon. She asked if the skylight was still holding. It was. I went back to the office the next day and ran our stand-up like always. Priya asked if we should take the first scene panel down until the dust settled. I told her to leave it. Truth doesn't mind dust. It minds edits. In my drawer, the email with all squared away. Thanks sat behind the paper clips next to the certified receipt with the neat little postmaster stamp. The court had seen enough to understand the shape. The rest would follow gravity and calendars. I shut the drawer, answered 2 tickets, and scheduled a maintenance window. Because keeping systems stable is what I do while other people learn the rules they tried to bend still have edges. Investigations don't move like avalanches. They move like calendars. Audit interviews on Mondays. E-discovery polls on Wednesdays. A Friday hold notice that lands in your inbox at 5:58 p.m. within 2 weeks of the hearing. The company announced temporary administrative actions in a memo with the tone of an apology to the building itself. Mara was relieved of duties pending review. Dax was on leave. The memo ended with a sentence about integrity that read like it had been copied from a brochure. People forwarded it to each other without comment. You don't need commentary when the nouns are that clear. At my level, nothing theatrical happened. I ran stand-up. I approved a hotfix for a memory leak that had been eating 0.1%. No one noticed until the graph were a groove. Priya pushed a dashboard tweak that made our analysts clap in a meeting that wasn't meant for clapping. I wrote a performance note for the junior who had saved us 2 Saturdays ago. Work kept being work, which is the strange mercy of systems that have to be up even when other things go down. HR scheduled a wellness check-in. The woman had a voice that could narrate meditation apps. She asked if I felt safe at work. I said yes. She asked if I needed time off. I said no. She told me resources were available. I thanked her and asked if I could see the updated compliance attestation forms for directors. She hesitated long enough to confess something without words, then sent the link. I downloaded it and filed it under policies with everything else. I didn't read it. The point was never the script. The point was who signed it and when. Mara moved into a furnished short-term place 4 blocks from the river. I learned that from the credit card bill that still arrived at our apartment until the change took. She texted once, "We should talk." I typed a dozen sentences, each one more precise than the last, then deleted them all and replied, "Our attorneys can coordinate anything necessary." My phone stayed quiet after that. The dog still slept on her side of the bed. Animals are honest in ways people can't always afford. What collapsed wasn't loud. It was a contacting of space. People who'd laughed too easily around Mara stopped gathering where she might enter. Finance meetings started on time because no one waited for her to walk in. Legal emails got longer and included footers with phrases like pursuant to the court's order. I was copied on threads I'd never been invited to before because I was a fact that needed to be handled correctly. Respect isn't affection. It's alignment with reality. Mid-month, audit asked to shadow our change process for a week for completeness. I gave them a desk, a monitor, and the guest Wi-Fi password written on a sticky. They watched us breathe. Open ticket, reproduce issue, test, approve, deploy, verify. When they asked why I keep paper copies of certain emails in my drawer, I said, because drawers are faster than subpoenas. They smiled, wrote that down, and didn't ask me to elaborate. Professionals enjoy a good line, even when it's boring. Outside counsel started showing up on conference calls with last names that belong on office doors. One of them, a woman with a voice like a clean blade, asked in a careful way whether anyone had distributed execution instruments off-premises besides this one time. You could hear the hope in her question. Please say this was an isolated lapse so we can build a fence around it. I said I could only speak to what touched my lane, and what had touched my lane had already been shown to the court. She asked if I'd be willing to sit for a longer interview. I said yes. Saying yes costs less than saying no when you have a file full of boring proof. The interview happened in a windowless room with a carafe of coffee no one poured. They recorded. They asked for the full narrative and then asked for it again from the middle, then from the end. I told it the same way each time. Who said what, when the paper sat on our table, what the mail clerk stamped, where I was standing when the judge asked the only question that mattered. They wanted adjectives. I gave them timestamps. For once, that was exactly what the room needed. Word traveled in the way it always does, slowly, then all at once. A board committee formed with a name that sounds like a seatbelt. One director resigned to spend more time with family in another state. Someone leaked a paragraph to a reporter who writes about fintech governance. The paragraph turned into a column that used the word culture 3 times. No one said my name. The story wasn't about me. It was about a system that trusted certain smiles more than it trusted its own rules. On a Tuesday, my manager asked me if I wanted an internal transfer, new title, new floor, fresh energy. I asked if the work would be different. He said the badge would open different doors. I said a badge is a rectangle that tells security where to point you when the fire alarm goes off. He laughed because he thought I was being clever. I wasn't. I told him I'd think about it. That night I met with a recruiter from a smaller payments shop across town. We talked in a coffee place that used to be a bank. The vault is still there, full of reclaimed chairs. The CEO joined for 20 minutes, asked real questions. He said they needed someone who enjoys boring problems and isn't afraid of the sentence "it depends." I said that's my hobby. We shook hands in a way that felt like a date where you decide to tell the truth on purpose. The divorce papers arrived by courier in an envelope thick with pre-printed options. My attorney walked me through them by phone while I sat on the floor, the dog's head on my knee, the TV silent. The grounds didn't matter. The facts did. The transcript from court slipped into the packet like a quiet friend. We filed without adjectives. Neither of us asked for anything we couldn't defend with a piece of paper. Her attorney sent back a request that read like a dare. Mine replied with a copy of the policy paragraph and the delivery log. The dare ended there. I gave notice on a Monday. 2 weeks, standard, no speeches. HR offered to accelerate my vesting schedule as a gesture. I declined. I didn't want anything that could be read later as a purchase. They asked if I'd consider staying through quarter close. I said my replacement already sits 3 desks down and knows exactly where the bodies aren't buried. I sent a note to my team that used the word gratitude once and the word handoff 3 times. Priya cried. The junior looked like someone just told him he had the con for the first time. He did. On my last day, I walked the floor with a box that didn't hold as much as it looked like it should. A mug that never touched coffee. A plant that had found a way to survive without light. The folder of dull proofs stayed home. It had done its job. I turned in my badge. Security said good luck like it was one word. In the elevator, I pressed the lobby button and looked at my reflection the way you look at a stranger you might trust. Outside, the heat lifted off the pavement like a rumor. I drove to my parents' place for dinner because my mother believes roasted chicken resets the world. My father asked if the skylight still held. It did. We ate. We rinsed plates. We watched the dog fall asleep in a position I wished my mind could learn. No one asked me why. Mara texted one more time. 4 sentences about how narratives get weaponized and how no one understands pressure at her level. I read it, set the phone face down, and didn't reply. The last door sometimes closes without a sound. The last lesson does, too. One day, the CEO asked me what I needed most from him. I said, write the rules down and then keep them on. He said okay like a person who knows okay is a contract. Some nights I still wake to the quiet adrenaline of courtrooms and conference rooms. I let it pass through. Then I make a list in my head like I did on the flight to Santa Fe. Who I am, what I sign, where I stand when I sign it. The list ends the same way every time, with a house where the skylight holds and a folder that doesn't need to be opened anymore. They forgot one rule. I didn't. I just have to stand still long enough for the world to notice which way the floor tilts and refuse to let anyone tell me to lean. Respect isn't negotiated in memos or court transcripts. It's practiced when no one is clapping. I left because I could. I stayed myself because I would.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.